The running back position is incredibly interesting in the NFL. These players tend to be losing value when it comes to contracts, but there's still some really fantastic players. Today we're going to be looking at pretty much every relevant running back in the NFL, seeing how they stack up in this tier list. Thank you so much for joining me. Let's dive into it. Starting with Alvin Kamara, he is not the same player that he once was. I still think he is a good running back one. He has lost a little bit of the explosiveness. Some of the stats have gone down. There's obviously a looming suspension as well with him, so I do think he is still a very good player, but I don't think he's necessarily in the upper echelon of running backs in the NFL at this point. We're going to throw him in that good running back one spot. Next, Samaje Perine. I'm going to throw him in that solid running back two. He was really nice for Cincinnati last year as a pass protector. He did some nice things in the running game as well. He's a hard-nosed, he'll lower his shoulder and pick up 3-4 yards every single time. He's not the most explosive runner by any means. He's not going to be the most productive, but he's a really good pass protector. He's pretty solid out of the backfield on receiving routes as well. And he'll lower the shoulder. He's very powerful and tough to bring down. So I think he's pretty much a prototype running back two. Had probably his best season in the NFL last year with Cincinnati, and I think he's a very solid pickup for the Denver Broncos. Next, we have Miles Sanders. I am going to put him in that fine starter category. I think Sanders is kind of a bit of a product of what the Philadelphia Eagles have been for him. I do think his vision is pretty below average to bad, and I think behind a fantastic offensive line for the Eagles, it didn't matter as much, but I do think, in Carolina, they do have a solid offensive line, but it's not the best in the league like the Eagles have. I do think he will regress somewhat there, not playing with the same caliber of players on that offense. I still think he's a perfectly fine starter. He's got some explosiveness and some speed. He can do some things out of the backfield. He just is very much the type of player that's looking to break every single play for a long gain. Sometimes he'll get you a 50-yard touchdown, but just not consistently enough, able to get 4 or 5 yards on a consistent basis when maybe the hole's plugged up a little bit. He's not very good at lowering his shoulder and just picking up the yardage needed. So I think he's a perfectly fine starter, nothing crazy, but I do think he is going to fit into that tier there. Josh Jacobs, based on what he showed last year, he's absolutely an elite level running back. I think he really kind of carried the Raiders' offense last year. They didn't have much of an offensive line. The run blocking really didn't provide much for him at all. He was a true creator at the running back position, and that's very hard to find. I think he absolutely deserves to be in that spot. The Raiders are kind of scrambling after they declined his fifth-year option. I think that was clearly a terrible decision, and now they're going to have to decide whether they're going to pay him, whether he's going to pay on the franchise tag. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens with Josh Jacobs moving forward. But I do think based on what he showed last year in a pretty average offense, he is definitely an elite level running back. Next, we have J.K. Dobbins. I'm going to put him in the fine starter tier as well. I don't think Dobbins is ever going to turn into a dominant running back one. I thought he showed some really nice things at Ohio State, but I think some of the injuries early on in his NFL career really kind of banged him up a bit. I do think he's lost a little bit of that explosiveness that he had, and he is a good player, but the injury bug has just kind of gotten to him, and he's just not a dynamic player at this point. I think he's very solid behind a well-designed running scheme and a good offensive line. I think he's going to be fairly productive if he's able to stay healthy and, you have that quarterback run threat, which keeps defenses honest and definitely opens up some running lanes for him. I just don't think he's really breaking open the offense. He's not going to be somebody that really elevates, the lanes that are there. He's not creating as much as some of these really, really good running backs. Next, we have Dameon Pierce. I think he's a good running back one. Based on what he showed last year, I know it was a fairly small sample size, but I really liked what I saw. He runs angry, and that is absolutely the kind of running back that I absolutely love. I think he is a fantastic young player that has a lot of upside. His offensive line was not good. He didn't have a lot of, receiving game around him either. It's not like there was a lot keeping defenses honest when Dameon Pierce was in the game. He is just so difficult to bring down. He's so good when it comes to making guys miss in open space, and I think he is a fun runner to watch. I definitely like his upside in an offense that'll hopefully be a little bit better next year, and I definitely think he is a good running back one, somebody that can be a real difference maker for that Texans offense if they really kind of feed him. Next, we have Khalil Herbert. I like Khalil Herbert. I think he is probably more of a solid running back too. I think he's one of the better running running back 2s in the league. If he is a starter this year, I don't think he's ever going to be a true workhorse back. I don't think he has that kind of frame, and not sure that he's really going to be able to handle that kind of 300 carry workload or whatever they're asking of him. But I do think that as a nice complementary, kind of maybe that lightning to somebody else's thunder like they had in David Montgomery previously, now maybe Donta Foreman or Roschon Johnson will fill that role. I think he's a very nice complementary back. He can come in, be a pass catcher. He can be somebody that kind of changes pace, has really good yards per carry. The Bears actually had a decent running game last year. Once again, like the Ravens, Justin Fields can keep them honest, keep those defenses a little bit longer on the edge, and that allows a lot of running lanes for Khalil Herbert. So I think he's going to be a productive player, but I think he's more suited to be a really solid running back too. And I definitely think that's kind of where he would fit at this tier list here. Next, we have Tyler Algier. I do think Tyler Algier is a good to fine starter. I think that last year he did a really good job producing. I love the Falcons' offensive line. They want to run the ball so much. So I do think he benefited a little bit from that. But he's a fun player to watch. He's somebody that doesn't go down easy on first contact. He has a good motor. He runs hard. And I definitely think that he would be a fine starter in the league. Now, obviously, the Falcons drafted Bijan Robinson, who we'll get to later. And I certainly think that is going to cut into Tyler Algier's carries a lot, but I do think he will be potentially the best running back too in the NFL this season. He was an 1,000-yard rusher as a rookie, as a fifth-round rookie, so definitely showed some great things. I think he would be a perfectly fine starter in the league if he was asked to start. Now he can be kind of a nice complementary back, and I'll be excited to see what Algier can do when Bijan Robinson is off the field or maybe flexing out to another position. So I definitely think Algier is a good player for sure. The other Falcons running back, wide receiver hybrid here, Cordarrelle Patterson, I think at this point in his career is a solid running back too. He can do some things that are very creative. He's not a true running back really. He's kind of a guy that you just want to get the ball in his hands and let him create in space. I think whether that's quick screen passes or jet sweeps to him, I think that's more where he's going to be effective than a true downhill runner or a true running back in this offense, especially since they now have Algier and Bijan Robinson. So I think he really more fits now as a nice running back to somebody that I think could be a really solid player for them. And, I do think that he'll definitely still have a role in this Falcons offense. Next, we have Rachaad White. I'm going to go with young with upside here with White. He showed some nice things, especially as a pass catcher for the Buccaneers last year. I think Tom Brady ended up trusting him pretty well, and I definitely think that he's going to have a big role as kind of that third down receiving back, and that's a very important role to fill in today's NFL. Somebody that can be a decent pass protector, can get him the ball on checkdowns in space and let him go to work. And I think Rachaad White has some really nice upside doing that. I don't think he's necessarily the most dominant true runner of the football, but I definitely think he's got some serious upside and somebody I will be very interested to see how he progresses in his career. Up next, we have Kenneth Walker for the Seahawks. I thought he was having a fantastic rookie season before he got injured. And, I thought he showed some really good things as a nice outside zone runner. I think he's going to be really, really good in that scheme. I think the Seahawks have done a really good job kind of building an offense where you can get the offensive line moving, you can get Kenneth Walker, just the ability to kind of use his vision. I thought he showed some really good vision, some good contact balance as a rookie. They ended up drafting Zach Charbonnet, who we might as well talk about as well. I do think he needs to prove it. I really like Charbonnet coming out of college, but I do think he will have to kind of define his role in the NFL as a running back too behind Kenneth Walker. I do think they do things differently. Walker is a really good outside zone runner, while I think Charbonnet is kind of better within the tackles. He'll lower a shoulder and really kind of run you over for 5 yards. So I do think they'll fill kind of different roles, and I will be very interested to see how the Seahawks decide to use the both of them. I really like both of them as players, but I think Walker is shown to be a really solid running back one. Charbonnet, I believe, can certainly get there, but I do think he needs to prove it. His role is just a little bit less defined than somebody like Rachaad White, so that's why I am going to put him in that tier there. Next, we have Christian McCaffrey. In my opinion, one of the best, if not the best running back in the NFL. I just think his versatility, he's fantastic, and that outside zone system that Shanahan runs in San Francisco, that's exactly the kind of scheme that can make the most out of his abilities, but it's really what he does as a true receiver. He's one of the few running backs that did actually get a big payday, and that's because he is a true, weapon out of the backfield. He is a wide receiver. He's basically somebody you can get the ball in space. He can make plays. He's a great route runner. If you put a linebacker linebacker or even a safety on him, they're probably not going to be able to hold up against Christian McCaffrey. That's what makes him so dangerous. He's a true positional matchup nightmare, and that makes him, one of the most dangerous and one of the most effective running backs in the NFL. I think he's the best. He's going to go in that elite tier for sure. Next, we have James Conner. I like James Conner for what he is. He's an effective red zone threat. I think he's somebody that has shown that, he is kind of what he is at this point. He is a good, powerful runner. He's, very good at converting short yardage situation to lower his shoulder, pick up a few yards. I definitely think that he is good for what he is as kind of that short yardage, grinded out in between the tackles kind of running back. I just don't think he provides much juice beyond that. I'm not sure that he's the best when it comes to the receiving game. I just think that there is some left to be desired. He's a perfectly fine starter, and you kind of know what you are getting with him, and I certainly respect what he does. I just think that, there is a little bit of a cap on his upside. He's a perfectly fine starter and somebody that I think, you're not mad if he's your starting running back. You just aren't super thrilled about it either. He's, just a perfectly fine running back, and you know what you're getting from him. Next, you have Cam Akers. Akers, had a lot of promise, tore his Achilles, was a little bit slow getting back. There was a lot of just kind of mess with the Rams last year. There was thoughts that he might be traded, then he ended up not being traded, played pretty well towards the end of the season. So it'll be very interesting to see kind of how Cam Akers progresses. I think you could move him up a tier, you could move him down a tier. He, really didn't show a lot for a time being and then has really turned it on. He's just got to get the consistency there, and I definitely think that Akers is kind of tough to place. Right now, I am going to put him in that fine starter tier because I do think that's, approximately what he's been at this point. Next, you have DeAndre Swift, and Swift, I was just kind of lost a little bit of faith in. I don't think he's a bad player, and I like the Eagles taking a swing on him because, they kind of got him for nothing, and the Lions were pretty much ready to move on, and I do think there was a decent reason for that. I think his vision is really terrible. It's just one of those things where he's not consistently hitting the holes that he's supposed to. He's looking to bounce it out outside for a big gain. And yeah, he does have some really explosive big plays, but I also think there's just too many times that he is not hitting the hole where he's supposed to. He's not picking up the 3 yards and just moving the chains and picking up a first down when he needs to. I do think that there is just some real inconsistencies in his game. Based off what he's shown so far, I don't think he's more than just a solid running back too. Maybe you could move him up to that fine starter tier. I don't think he's a bad player by any means. I just don't think that he's shown the consistency to be a consistent starter at this point. There's a reason the Lions decided to move off of him. Even the Eagles aren't putting all of their eggs in this DeAndre Swift basket by any means. They have Rashad Penny, they have Kenny Gainwell as well. So I don't think that they have a ton of faith in him absolutely turning into a stud running back one, but I do think he has that potential. Next up, Tony Pollard. I think he showed last year he is a great starter. I really love his explosiveness. He's really good at kind of in all phases of the game. He's very good at just explosive runs. He turns 3-yard runs into 5-yard runs. He turns 5-yard runs into 7-yard runs. And he's just consistently getting a little bit more out of every play than he should. Dallas finally decided to move off of Ezekiel Elliott and move towards Tony Pollard, and that was one of the best decisions they have made, in a long time. Pollard was truly one of the better running backs in the league. There's some issues now about potentially coming back from injury. Is he going to get that new contract? There's still a lot of uncertainty about that, but based on what he showed last year, I thought he was one of the best running backs in the NFL. Next, we have Roschon Johnson. I liked Roschon Johnson as a nice pick for the Bears. I do think he needs to prove it. He has a little bit, less defined path to playing time in an offense that has Khalil Herbert, Donta Foreman. I do think he is going to start the year as the running back 3. He could certainly earn some reps, moving forward. I thought he was a good pass protector. I definitely think he can get in there on third down and be a nice player for them. I just do think he needs to prove it. I like the upside that he has, but I just think that, in a role that, he might not play a ton this year. He does just need to go ahead and prove that he is going to be a quality NFL player. He was a mid-round pick, so I do think that tier is appropriate for him. Ezekiel Elliott, I do think, is pretty much washed at this point. I just don't think he's the same player that he once was. I don't think he's completely useless by any means, but I just don't think that he has the juice left to really kind of be an elite-level running back by any means. I do think he could come in, be a fine running back too, and, grind out some tough yards, be a decent pass protector, but really anything more than that, I think you're asking a lot. Next up, Rashad Penny. I'm going to put him in the solid running back 2 tier. He's one of the most difficult running backs because oftentimes when he's played, he's been incredibly dynamic, incredibly explosive, been very productive for the Seahawks. And then, he gets injured and he misses most of the year. And we do this pretty much every year. Now the Eagles have him on the roster. I think they maybe think that they can, get a healthy, 10 games out of him or so before he gets injured and be a really solid running back for them. I just don't think that he's shown the consistency, whether it's health or, on the field, to really consider being a true starting running back in the league, but I definitely think he's a solid running back too. He's shown some really good things, been very productive in some of the chances he's gotten. He just really hasn't been able to be relied on as a true running back one. So that's why he's going to be in that spot there. Saquan Barkley, I do think, is an elite level running back. I am going to put him in that elite tier. He really showed when he was able to stay healthy last year. He is still one of the best running backs in the league. He's a true weapon in the passing game. He was fantastic in Brian Daboll's new scheme as well. One of the best running backs in the NFL. It's pretty much as simple as that. Brian Robinson up next. I thought he was a perfectly fine starter. I don't think he was anything exceptional. He's kind of that bigger bodied, tough runner that'll pick up some good yards for you. He's not the most explosive. He's not the most dangerous in the passing game, but I think he's a perfectly fine starter for the Commanders. I think him and Gibson are perfectly fine players. Gibson, I think, at this point in his career is just kind of a solid running back too. He can be a good pass catcher, somebody that kind of change a pace back to Brian Robinson. He provides a little bit more of that burst and energy that can be a little bit off-putting for defenses after getting run over by Brian Robinson a couple of times. So I think it's a well-built running back room. I just don't think either of these guys are really super scary at their respective spots. I think Robinson is a fine starter and Gibson is a pretty solid running back too, and that's kind of the extent of it. Dalvin Cook is a tough one. I still think he is a good running back, but it is just kind of hard to say. There's rumors that he's going to sign with the Jets or maybe the Dolphins. I do think he would be a productive player. He's not necessarily the same dominant running back that he was in Minnesota, but I still think he is a good running back one. He's not completely washed like some of these other free agents like, Ezekiel Elliott and some of these other guys. I still think there's a very good running back in there. He's just not necessarily in that elite tier like he once was. He has maybe fallen down a couple of pegs. I do think that last year was probably his worst year of his career. And, with his age and kind of his contract situation, teams not necessarily jumping at the opportunity to get him. I do think that, at this point, a good running back one is kind of what you're expecting from Dalvin Cook. Next, we have Jonathan Taylor. I think he's a great starter. I think you could make the argument to put him in the elite tier based off his performance 2 years ago, but last year just dealt with a lot of injuries. Now there's the whole conversation about, Jim Irsay and him potentially being traded. I still think he's one of the best young running backs in the NFL. He's a great starting running back and definitely somebody that is one of the best players at this position in the league, especially because of his age. He's probably one of the most valuable. So I'll be very interested to see if a team jumps at the opportunity to trade for him, give him a big extension, because it doesn't sound likely that that's going to happen with the Colts, but I'll be very interested to see where he lands because he's an immensely talented player. Next, we have Travis Etienne. I think he's settled in as a good running back one as well. I really love his explosiveness. I mean, in the passing game especially, he's a real weapon, and that's something that, he is very much a Christian McCaffrey light when it comes to that. He is nowhere near the caliber of player as Christian McCaffrey, but he does a lot of the same things well. He's very tough to guard out of the backfield as a wide receiver. He's very explosive, especially on outside zone. I think Doug Peterson did a great job of utilizing him to kind of his best abilities there. I do think he's on a very much upward trajectory and is a very good running back one in the NFL at this point. Derrick Henry still deserves to be in this elite tier until proven otherwise. I do think that the carries have to start weighing on him at some point, but he is so big, he's so difficult to tackle, he's so dominant, and over the past 5 seasons, he has probably consistently been the best running back in the NFL. I do think that McCaffrey offers a little bit more in the receiving game. Henry really doesn't do much of that at all, but I do think that probably the toughest running back to play against in the NFL is likely Derrick Henry because he just wears on you. He's so difficult to tackle. Come fourth quarter, no defense wants to tackle him, and he's so difficult to bring down. Obviously one of the best running backs in the league and clearly deserves to be in that elite category. Next, we have Joe Mixon. I do think Mixon fell down a little bit last year, showed his age a little bit. He agreed to a restructured contract with the Bengals that, it was essentially just a pay cut. I still think he's a good running back one. Yeah, Bengals offensive line was not very good at run blocking earlier on in the year. I do think they have a much better run blocking unit now with the addition of Orlando Brown, and they have some more things figured out on that offensive line. It's more built around that power run game, which they really kind of transitioned to halfway throughout the season. I think Mixon looks a lot better in that. He has performances where he's really impressive. You think to the Panthers game last year that, he was absolutely exploding when it came to fantasy football. He had 5 touchdowns in the first half and was just going absolutely nuts. But about the kind of consistent performances, his yards per carry dipped a lot last year, and he needs to rebound to really kind of be considered a great starter like he once was. But he's still certainly in that good running back 1 tier. I still think he's an above average starter in this league for sure. Next we have D'Onta Foreman. I think Foreman is a solid running back too. He's shown some really good things in pretty much every system he's been in. He's been pretty productive, especially with the Panthers last year. He showed some nice things with the Titans when he was on it. I think he'll have a real opportunity in this Bears offense to be a really good player. I think he's somebody that's been underrated for a long time. He's not likely going to be a dominant running back 1. He's not going to change the numbers. He's not always making huge explosive runs, but I think he wears down on a defense. He's tough to tackle, and he's a very solid player. Somebody that I think is a very solid running back too, and definitely, could be a force for the Bears this year in a running back room that, I think has some talent, but there's going to be a lot of opportunities for these guys to seize carries. I think Foreman will take a bigger workload than a lot of people think. Next, we have Nick Chubb. I think he is the second best running back in the NFL. So difficult to tackle. I think he's the best pure runner in the NFL, and his contact balance is so impressive. He's not huge in the passing game, which I do think hurts it potentially its fantasy value a little bit, but he is so good when it comes to just running the football. That Browns offensive line opens up some huge holes, and Chubb just bursts through them every single time. He's so good, and I think he is one of the best running backs in the league, clearly deserves to be in that elite category, and just so tough to tackle. That contact balance is probably the best in the NFL. Really impressive whenever I watch Nick Chubb. He's just dominating. Next, Kareem Hunt. I think Hunt is pretty much in this category as well. No team really seems to have much interest in him. It seems to have kind of passed him by his opportunity. He was one of the best running back 2s in the league. He was probably the best with the Browns for a few years. He was great on the Chiefs. Now at this point in his career, it just seems like things are not really there for him anymore. I wouldn't expect him to be a big dynamic player for many teams moving forward. Next we have Najee Harris, and Najee Harris is somebody that I think is kind of tough to rank because a lot of his production is based on pure volume. He really hasn't had a great yards per carry. Now, I will say additionally, his offensive coordinator is the worst in the NFL. It's absolutely atrocious when it comes to the schemes, when it comes to mixing up the runs and, keeping the defense off balance. I think Najee Harris just doesn't have the help in that regard. Now, Matt Canada certainly doesn't help him, but I do think that Harris is a productive player, but it is more based on volume. He just goes down on contact a little bit surprisingly too much, and I do think that, Jaylen Warren, who we're going to talk about as well, Warren showed some fantastic things last year. I thought he showed some really, really good, moments, and, there was a reason he was taking carries away from Najee Harris. I think Najee's a very good running back, but I think Warren is very deserving of the carries he gets as well and the playtime he gets as well. Najee Harris, a good receiver. He's shown some nice things. He's a complete running back. I just don't know that really a true game changer like they drafted him to be. First round running back, high expectations. Maybe he has lived up to him. I don't think he necessarily has, but I don't think he's a bad player by any means. Next, we have James Cook. Obviously, somebody with some upside, somebody the Bills are relying on a lot this year to kind of take that next step and really become a true weapon. He wasn't somebody that I loved coming into the league. I thought he was a little bit overdrafted, but I definitely think he's got some upside. He's got a clear path to a lot of carries in the Bills offense that, is likely going to be very high scoring. So definitely think the upside is there. He's definitely more of a receiving back, which fits Buffalo's offense. They love to pass the ball and really aren't too concerned with the running game. So I do think that he's going to be a very big piece in that there, coming out of the backfield, being a weapon, taking on linebackers and winning there. I definitely think he can be effective there. Devin Singletary moved to Houston. I don't think he's anything too crazy. He's a solid running back too. He never really turned into a great running back with Buffalo. I think running back 2 behind Dameon Pierce, he can find a nice role for the Texans and be a solid player for him. Next up, we have Breece Hall. Breece Hall was on pace to win Rookie of the Year before getting hurt. I thought he showed great vision, great contact balance, was really kind of coming on before he got injured. Thought he showed some really nice things as a rookie, and he was my running back 1 in that draft class, and I think he absolutely showed why. Very good runner of the football. I think he showed some nice things in the passing game as well. This Jets offense is going to be, hopefully much better for their sake this year with Aaron Rodgers at the helm. With Hall coming back from that injury, it sounds like they're not trying to rush him back. Potentially might bring in Dalvin Cook just so he can really get right and get ready for the playoffs. But I think he has shown to be a really good running back, and at a very young age has a high potential to maybe even climb this list further. Michael Carter, I think, is maybe in the need to prove it here. He's now going into year 3. I don't think he's a bad player by any means, but just in an opportunity where carries are going to be more and more difficult to get with Breece Hall coming back, maybe Dalvin Cook coming in. He's going to potentially running back 3. I do think that he's a decent player, but he's really got to prove that he deserves to get the ball. He deserves to be on the field. So that's kind of why we're going to put him in that tier there. Next, we have Raheem Mostert. Mostert is somebody that I think is just fine. He's really good in a wide zone system where he can really just use his speed, hit that hole, and go. And I think that's very effective. Now, as a true runner, somebody between the tackles, I do think he's pretty limited. I don't think he's necessarily one of the better running backs in the league, but I think he could be a very good system running back, and that has value, especially in Miami's offense that has some real upside, especially within that system. Now, Devon Achane is somebody that I do think needs to prove it as well. He's somebody that was kind of more of a mid-round pick. He fits a lot of that same mold of Raheem Mostert. Can he overtake him? Can he really kind of turn into a true playmaker? I definitely think he has the ability to do so, but I do think he needs to prove that he deserves those touches over Mostert, over Jeff Wilson, over some of those other guys that they have in Miami. So that's where he is going to go for now as well. A.J. Dillon is kind of hard. I do see him more as, just a true running back too. I think he would potentially be one of the maybe not as good starting running backs in the NFL, but I think he'd be fine. He's a big bruiser. He does go down surprisingly often on first contact, and I do think he could do a little bit more, but, between the tackles, because of his true just beef and size in that middle, he can be a really good goal line running back. He can be somebody that can just push the chains and knows his role, especially in an offense with Aaron Jones, who I think is a great starting running back, especially as a receiver. He provides a ton of value there. He's a great complement to that, and Aaron Jones has kind of taken on a bigger receiving role the past couple of years with basically no wide receivers for Aaron Rodgers to throw to. Aaron Jones was often one of his top options. I think that really kind of proved that he was a really good wide receiver. Dillon kind of filled in a little bit more of the true running back room, and I think he's a fine starter. I think Aaron Jones certainly deserves to be in that great starter tier just because of his versatility, both as a runner in the outside zone system, but also as a true dynamic weapon at wide receiver as well. Next, we have Ramondre Stevenson. Stevenson really kind of broke out last year as a true, really good running back 1. He showed some really nice qualities, was good in both the passing and the running game. I think the Patriots truly do want to run the ball a lot. With Mac Jones at quarterback, you're not likely getting tons of high-end quarterback play all the time on a consistent basis. I think they're going to lean heavily on Ramondre Stevenson to be a true cog of their offense. He showed some really great things last year, and I think is somebody that a lot of people overlook when talking about some of the best running backs in the NFL. I wouldn't necessarily put him in the elite or great starter tier, but he is a very good running back 1. Next, we have Javonte Williams. Williams is a tough one to rank as well because as a rookie, he showed some great things. His contact balance, his ability to force missed tackles was truly impressive. Got injured early on last year, really wasn't able to show much, and there are rumors that potentially that injury was bad. He tore pretty much everything you could possibly tear in the knee, and I certainly hope that he can recover and be a really solid piece for them this year. I do think it might take another full year for him to really get back to his true self, but based on what he saw as a rookie, he was very tough to bring down, a very fun player to watch. I think he's a very good running back when he's in there and healthy. He just needs to kind of prove that he can be his former self as well, and I definitely think he would, move up in that list. Next, we have Austin Eckler, one of the best receiving backs in the NFL. He's been a big proponent of running back getting paid, and I think he has a reason to be a little bit more, adamant about that, as he is a true dynamic weapon as a wide receiver, basically out of the backfield. And for guys like Christian McCaffrey, who did get paid because they have that versatility, that's something that I do think running backs will be asked to do a bit more of. Eckler is kind of the pinnacle of that. He's huge in fantasy football because of PPR leagues. He's so good in that setting, but I think he's an underrated runner as well. He's shown some nice things. Obviously, where he kind of makes his money is that receiving game, and that's what makes him a great starter, but I definitely think he's a fantastic running back and one of the best in the league. Next, we have Isaiah Pacheco, and Pacheco is I think, fine starter. He's not somebody that, I would necessarily say is, game-breaking. He was very cheap. He was a great find for the Chiefs, and somebody that, was unexpectedly a huge part of their Super Bowl run last year. I don't think he's necessarily, the cog of that offense. He's not somebody that, is necessarily going to scare defenses, but he's definitely an effective player that, you give him a couple of yards, he'll take those and push forward and fall forward for 2 more. He's a hard runner, and I definitely like what he provides for that Chiefs offense. Next, we have Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He's somebody I just never really got the first-round hype for. I thought he was way overdrafted when the Chiefs took him. In a running back room now with Jerick McKinnon as well as Pacheco, he's potentially fallen to 3rd on that depth chart, and definitely don't think he has really shown anything that makes him deserve to get more carries than those other guys. He is definitely somebody that needs to prove it. Otherwise, he likely will not be a true starting caliber running back by any point moving forward. Next, we have Jahmyr Gibbs. Gibbs is somebody that is young with a lot of upside. I do think he is a great receiving back. I was a lot lower on him. I did not like this pick for the Lions just simply because of positional value, and I really thought he was more of a 2nd-round player. I didn't have even a true 1st-round grade on him, so taking him 12 overall was kind of shocking to me. But I do think in a role where, he's asked to be a true receiving back, be a weapon out of the backfield, maybe he turns into somebody like an Austin Eckler, but I just didn't see, him as a great contact balance runner, somebody between the tackles that really was super great at, falling forward. Obviously, that's not necessarily his game. That's why they have David Montgomery, but I just think there was a lot to invest in somebody that I do think will be somewhat one-dimensional, but I think Montgomery is a perfectly fine starter for you. If, you have him and Gibbs, that's a very exciting running back room. It's just, kind of the resources they invested into it that makes me question, the decision-making there, but Montgomery he's not a breakaway runner by any means, but I think he is very solid when it comes to falling forward, good contact balance, picking up yards, and somebody that I like as just a solid starter. Next, we have Kendre Miller. He wasn't somebody I was the biggest fan of. I think he got to prove it in a running back room with Jamal Williams and some of those other guys. Jamal Williams, apparently not on this list as well. I think he would be, a fine starter as well, likely kind of towards the bottom of that there. He doesn't have the juice, he doesn't have the explosiveness, but he's a really solid player as well. Kendre Miller, must prove it, and I do think that it's going to be tough for him to find carries, especially if Alvin Kamara isn't suspended long term, but I do think he could be a good player for the Saints. It's just, he's got to kind of earn that opportunity. Next, we have Bijan Robinson, and Bijan Robinson hasn't played a snap in the NFL, but I don't really care. He is a good running back 1, and I honestly wanted to put him higher. I truly believe he'll be one of the 5 best running backs in the NFL by the end of the season. I think his ability in the passing game as a true runner, he's the best running back prospect I've ever scouted. I truly think he's going to be a dominant running back from day one. While it might be premature to have him in that running back 1 category, I do truly believe he is going to be a game-changing running back, a top 10 pick at running back that might actually turn out to be worth it for a Falcons offense that just wants to run the ball like crazy. And so Bijan Robinson is going to be a fantastic player for the Falcons. I'm going to put him in that running back 1 spot and the first slot in there because I just truly believe he's going to be one of the best in the league. Next, we have Alexander Mattison. I think he's a fine starter. He's somebody that's been one of the best running back 2s in the league. He's a true fantasy stash kind of guy that, as soon as Dalvin Cook goes down, because it happened kind of a lot, Mattison was the guy that everybody wanted on the waiver wire. And, he was always a very good pickup when he played. In a Vikings offense that probably won't ask too much of him, I do think he'll be a perfectly fine starter. He's not dynamic. He's not going to be a big plus for that offense, but I think he can certainly maintain a very good role, be a fine starter for him, and be a nice piece moving forward. So that's going to be my running back tier list there. Let me know what you thought. There was a ton of running backs we had ranked here. Who did I miss? Who did I have too high? Who did I have too low? Let me know down below. If you like this kind of content, please hit that subscribe button down below. It would truly mean a lot. Thank you so much for watching. I truly appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day. I'll catch you in the next one.